Greetings. Today I'm going to share some comments about ticket-driven software testing based on some task analysis I've done looking at what real practitioners are doing on projects. So my name is Rob Sabourin. You can learn more about me online. I guess you can Google me, but you can reach me at robsab@gmail.com. It's the best way. I'm not very big on social media. I think I've got a LinkedIn presence and a couple of things on YouTube. But basically, I'm a consultant in software engineering, and I've been at it for quite some time. And people work with me to learn about software engineering, improve their practices, and I in turn study a lot of what people really do. And I also teach at McGill University, where I do research assignments with my students, where we will go and look at several hundred companies at a time to study what they do. So in this particular case, we're going to be looking at how people implement testing work using tools that are workflow management tools that are part of, I guess, everyday life today in agile software development. Almost all of the cases we looked at, there's well over 100 workflows we studied, were implementations or variations of Scrum, and we're using workflow management software, usually commercial software such as, but not limited to, Microsoft DevOps, Git workflow management software, and Jira and various plugins to Jira and associated tools. But everybody seems to be doing some sort of workflow management software today. It's not new. People have been using workflow management software since practically I started in software engineering over 40 years ago. But today, the tools have become, I guess, a basis for a lot of the way people actually break down and assign technical work on software projects. So we did some task analysis to learn about how people practice these things. And when you do task analysis, you basically get people to share their experience by storytelling. And David Snowden tells us that one of the best ways to learn, especially about tacit knowledge, is by getting people to share their experiences in storytelling. So the task analysis we did here was based on the critical incident method, where we basically asked people to share experiences that were successes, experiences that were failures, or experiences that were examples of typical cases of basically implementing workflow in software engineering projects. We only studied examples from recent experience, and the selection we're looking at were basically collected in the year 2000, 2001, and 2002, primarily with a group of McGill undergraduate students who are doing it as part of their coursework in software engineering in practice. Task analysis involves basically looking at what people really do. We love to respectfully paraphrase John Kennedy's inaugural address. We ask not what your country can do for you, we ask what you can do for your country. Or in software engineering, we ask not what your system does for your user, but what does the user do with the system? What does the user really do with the system? We look at incidents, we look at examples, we look at stories that are real, recent, and relevant. Usually we search for examples which are instructive, where people learn something from them. I've been modeling workflows in software engineering for eons, and I've always liked to break down engineering workflows into different areas. So the common ones for me is the life of a requirement, the requirement workflow, the life of code, the code workflow, the life of a test, the testing workflow, the life of a bug, the bug workflow. And there's all sorts of other workflows too. But for me, they're all independent in some ways because they're prioritized different, managed differently. Today with modern workflow management systems, if you start looking at it, it's very abstract sometimes, and you can't see the delineation between managing the different objects. It's all like, as I say, a ticket. What's a ticket? Is it a code ticket, a test ticket, a programming ticket, a documentation ticket? It's just a ticket. State models are a useful way to draw and organize workflow descriptions. I've been using state models to develop workflows and get buy-in from them. State, nice definition from Jerry Weinberg, is a situation which can be recognized if it occurs again, and a state model is a great way to describe a workflow. So state models look like this. The circles represent the states of an object. The arrows represent transitions. So this is an example of a requirement workflow, where you start with a requirement that gets entered into a system, it gets reviewed, prioritized, eventually implemented, and confirmed. The code workflow is how do you basically manage the code base, the code lines, so multiple people can coordinate together. And there's a lot of beautiful models of that with the universe of GitHub, for example. There's the flow of a test idea from a concept to implementation, prioritized, organized, elaborated. There's the life of a bug, right? You find a bug, you review the bug, you prioritize the bug, fix the bug, confirm it's fixed, etc. And people today use ticket-driven software, basically, to organize these things. And when I say the word ticket, it is literally the term that people use. They say, I received a ticket. I got a work assignment. I was asked to complete this ticket. I did so many tickets per day. So tickets become the descriptive term when you're talking about work breakdown, which is very, for me, just interesting enough to give us a new vocabulary. We might say, well, when you take a testing project, how do you break a testing project into tickets? Where does that come from? And of course, this is now an interesting thing because tickets represent a lot of different stuff. I've seen tickets represent requirements. I've seen tickets represent collections of requirements or epics. I've seen tickets represent actual task assignments. And I've also seen tickets represent objects. So there's all sorts of views of what is a ticket. There's no sort of uniform standard of this. In our small study, so we're looking at, as I said, over 100 task analysis interviews. Almost all are practices in Scrum or variants of Scrum. Tickets were fundamentally about work breakdown. So we were assigned tickets to assign work. That was the work breakdown. The models used, well, the testers basically received work assignments as tickets. So they got a ticket. Actually, they got a ticket, a notification that they received a ticket, and there was information in the ticket. It was like a form filled with all sorts of information in the ticket. The work instructions were delivered through a ticket management system. So it wasn't a human being that talked to the tester. It was the workflow management system that gave them the ticket. Here is your ticket. Here is your work for the day. And in these tickets, there were chains of communications, long chains of communications, which were used for learning more details, asking clarifying questions, asking context questions, all sorts of things. But generally, what I was seeing, and I still see, is long chains, sometimes between 30 and 100 different questions that are asked, very often closed questions, to help confirm understanding and remove ambiguity from a ticket. So in some systems, you might have tickets that have different states. So, for example, if you're looking at a ticket representing a requirement, you might say, well, the ticket is ready for programming. The ticket is ready. The programming is in progress. The ticket is telling you the state is programming in progress. Then it gets ready for testing. Then testing in progress. Then done. So you have all these different like state models where you have a ticket can be in different states. And in this case, what the tester gets informed by is, hey, wait a sec. Now your ticket is ready for testing. So you get a notification saying that the programming is finished. It's now ready for testing. So that would be on a transition that you get that information. Now, if I hear the term ready for testing, I look at the models that are being used, and it sounds like something is ready for testing. That would be the first time a tester actually would start working on it. But in my view, this is probably the latest possible moment that you should start testing the ticket. Why wait so long to test the ticket? Shouldn't we shift left, is the expression people use a lot today? Shouldn't we start coming up with testing and organizing testing as soon as the concept of the requirement has been prioritized, as soon as we know we're going to implement it, rather than waiting for someone to say the programming is finished, therefore it's ready for testing? So to my mind, this state transition of ready for testing exists in almost 100% of the requirement models I saw in these ticket-driven software engineering. But almost always, it really didn't mean it's ready for test. It means this is the last possible moment to start testing. If you wait longer, you're going to delay the project. So I identified a dozen risks directly by studying these ticket-driven testing systems. And I just want to share with you the risks. And I don't really have conclusions. These are open questions for me. But I think there should be concerns if you're doing ticket-driven software testing. Be sensitive to these points. First of all, In almost all the cases that I saw, testers have little knowledge of the relationship between the assigned ticket and the rest of the development project. So they don't know how that one ticket fits into a bigger picture. If you will, there's no view of an architecture in the system or a progressive built environment in the system. So by working with a ticket, we're narrowing our scope of interest so small that we don't often see the relationship to other elements of the project. Testers first see the ticket when it's assigned to them. Almost every case, testers did not have a heads up in advance of what tickets were coming their way. Now, they could have looked at backlogs, they could have looked at the systems, but they really were organized so that they're waiting for a ticket to actually be assigned to them, and some human being assigned them a ticket. Also, the testers weren't involved in the preparation or organization of the tickets. There was no ticket grooming, per se. Testers' focus has been almost always on closing tickets. So you get a ticket, that's a job, that's a work assignment. Now you want to close it, and people will track, and the tools do a brilliant job of this. Talk about how long it took you to do a ticket, what's the frequency, how many tickets per day do you do, what's the average time of a ticket. Well, for me, there's a very interesting pile of metrics that come out, but it seems that the testers are really, really focused on closing tickets quickly. Not so concerned about the quality of the product as they are concerned about closing tickets. And reopening a closed ticket is looked down upon. It is frowned upon. So reopen tickets, bad. You want to minimize reopening a ticket. There's long chains of closed form questions used to clarify the work assignment. Nothing wrong with long chains of questions, by the way, except that we don't see this as a dialogue. We see this as a punctual set of questions that are asked almost arbitrarily when they come up. Sadly, this means that there's no actual human discussion of the clarification of this work that can be perhaps a planning session or a grooming session or a team architecture design session. So this doesn't seem to happen. Instead, we have closed questions in long lists. The scope and depth of testing is only limited to what's described in the specifics of the ticket, and very often the specifics of the ticket have a little bit to do with the requirements, a little bit to do with some basic acceptance criteria, but very little to do with the real technical work the programmers did, very little to do with the real environment that the software is going to be run on, and very little to do with the real workflow of the user. Even if you have a user story, it doesn't mean that's what the user's job is. A user story is a requirement model, not a description of a job. We see other risks like the lack of consideration of the actual technical changes. So that's one of the things I mentioned. We don't see what's really changed in the ticket. Now, a tester on almost all the systems I've seen can proactively hunt down information about this, but it is not evident. It is not evident. No programmer is walking through the code to explain the engineering changes or to help identify or help focus on risks. There seems to be a lack of considerations on the usage of the system. So how do end users use the system to get their job done? That's not in the ticket. There's a lack of consideration of context factors. What are the business factors that set this ticket aside? What are the technology factors that set this ticket aside? What are the organizational factors that make this ticket important? What are the cultural factors that have bearing on this ticket? What are the context factors sensitive that this ticket is sensitive to? Why would I want to put more or less effort on certain elements of this? What factors should we care about? And this is not really in the tickets, not the ones that I've seen. There's no evidence of knowledge being collected or managed other than these long chains of questions. And by the way, just because you have a long chain of questions doesn't mean that you're building knowledge. It just means you have evidence that you had a discussion. There's no evidence of technical collaboration between team members, except the Q&A stuff. There's really not. I could hardly see any way for people to technically collaborate to work together to get the job done. The tickets basically seem to be pointing to a very specific work assignment. So can we really break down the work that way? I don't know. Test findings are used to close tickets. Did it pass? Did it fail? There's very little room for other things we may have learned. There's very little room for what do you do if a new test idea comes up when you're fulfilling a ticket. Can you create a new ticket? I never met someone who could. And I never met someone who was encouraged to increase the scope, to look for new opportunities, to look for new risks, to look for things that are outside of just what's described in the ticket. Keep in mind, if I can make some concluding comments, keep in mind that workflow models are models. And as the famous statistician George Box is quoted as saying, all models are wrong. They're just models. But some models are useful. Now, the workflow model that we're using in software engineering is wrong. I guarantee it's incomplete. I guarantee it's just a handy tool to help us organize and coordinate our work. But it does not model all possible things that can happen. Workflow models shouldn't drive our testing effort. They shouldn't isolate our work. And they shouldn't establish or define what really is quality in our systems. Workflow models should support our testing effort. They should enable our collaboration, and they should help us to organize our work and get things done. I think it's important to focus on value, testing products that people have some sort of use for, have a rich myriad of testing ideas, have a deliberate dialogue, collaborate technically with other people who were members of the programming, testing, and usage communities and others. Basically, it's a team sport. An isolated ticket doesn't seem to me to represent or model very well the real dynamics of software testing. But I'm anxious to learn more. So if you want to share your experience on ticket-driven software engineering and how the models might be helpful for you or how they might be hindering your work, please keep in touch. Take care. Have a great day. Thanks for your attentiveness.